Hello grade 10. Quite a few of you are having difficulty trying to write this research task, and so what I've done over the weekend is I've actually done an exemplar that I've pulled from several different sources and from my own information. It's not a perfect A level. I didn't want to give you a perfect A level. In fact, you'll see at the very end there I've actually finished a little bit early, and it's going to deduct from my exemplar marks, but it'll at least give you an idea of how to actually come about and read and write a report like this. One of the biggest things that you guys face is needing to learn how to take a stance and argue it properly and justify, that means back yourself up, with credible evidence. And that evidence is derived from research, from valid sources. It has to be sources that you can say are definitely sources you can rely on, and you have to back that up and talk about that somewhere. And also from evidence that you've derived yourself from the data I've given you. So the pedigree, the Punnett square analysis, deciding whether or not there's a large chance that these people will have a child that has this disability, and also taking that data and doing a bit more with it, either from your Punnett square or from your research. The higher level marks actually come from where people extrapolate further, and I'll explain that a little bit further in this video. So all of you have been given this rejigged feedback sheet. Now take the time to look at this, because this actually took quite a while to put together. The other teachers are looking at this too, because it does help us to really clarify your marks. It's broken up into the different areas that I need to mark you on and what they actually require us to find evidence of before you get that mark. On the very side here, it shows you how many marks each one of these sections is worth if you get 100% in it as well. So it also helps you to figure out which sections you really need to focus and improve on if you want to get maximum marks. We've got several sections that we have to look at. How well you research is the first one, so it's down here under investigation. How well you gather evidence from sufficient sources, from not only from the data that I give you with the Punnett square and the pedigree, but also from other sources where they talk about what the disease is, why it causes such an issue, and especially what sort of impacts it has on society and individuals, cost impacts, health impacts, family impacts, all of those things that are going to justify your stance. If you don't have the research, you don't have an assignment. Now, how will you apply that research to back yourself up comes under application and analysis and interpretation. So here you're looking for, at first, a considered or reasonable rationale to pass, which means you have to take a stance, you have to tell me what your stance is, and you have to summarize the reasons why you have taken that stance, and those summaries need to be based on your research. Okay, they can't just be a general one. It has to be based on research. Otherwise, it's not a reasoned rationale. If you're just taking a stance without anything to back yourself up, other than your gut feeling, it's not a reasoned rationale. It's a partially reasoned rationale. A fully considered, justified rationale is the A-level one, where you really do back yourself up. This needs to be concise, straight to the point, and a summary of the points that you're going to be giving me in the rest of the research report. Your analysis is how well you identify and use the evidence that you have collected. That's that one there. There's the A-level up there. How well you identify trends and patterns and relationships. Now that's in the pedigree, that is in the Punnett square. All of those, you have to identify relationships and patterns in there and predict what their children will be. And if you take your research a little bit further, you can actually identify multiple ones, but they have to be based on credible possibilities. But that's what you have to do if you want to get the high level mark there, and they need to be justified. You can't just You can't just make every possible Punnett square and hope that the answer's in there somewhere. You have to justify to me why you did that Punnett square, why you think that is a possible outcome for this family. And that can't just be for full marks. It can't just be on what I've given you. You need to think about what's the possibility that someone in a family without the history of that disease could actually have that disease through random mutation or something like that. That sort of information there really gives you the maximum marks there, because sometimes you can have these diseases popping up. The other thing is, what's the chance that this person has a hidden carrier in their line, or that it could be from both the mum and the dad side, even though one of the sides doesn't seem to show a family history. If there's a chance that both parents could have it, even though it's not clear, then you need to talk about that and justify the Punnett square you give. Last but not least, limitations. Now this is a big one, and a lot of you haven't addressed this. The information I've given you, is there limitations to it? Do you need more evidence? Do you need more information? That is the first limitation you need to discuss. What is the limitation given the family history you have? What would you need to know more of to make a more definitive conclusion for the family? Okay, what extra information would you need about their family in order to give them a really good idea about whether or not they should have kids? Talk about the limitations of that. Talk about the limitations in your research as well. Have you got enough information there to make a good decision? Is there more information you need as to current treatment options, cost of treatment, possible improvements that they have for patient outcomes, anything like that? Is there anything you can say about how you can improve the research that you've had for these people to get more information later on? Try and discuss how your decision is limited by the amount of information that you have. In real life, it's really important for us to identify and acknowledge the limitations of any evidence we have before we make a decision. A lot of people will get some information and run with it, but not think about, hey, have I actually got enough information? Is this as much information as I could have had? Is there a chance that this information could change in the future and I will have to then reevaluate my decision? That sort of stuff is things that people need to start thinking about in a society where research and information is constantly changing. Limitations of evidence, you need to start thinking about it. Your interpretation here. This is how well you give me an argument. Okay, so when you're talking about why you've made this decision for this couple, have you justified it with research about the disease? Have you justified it in many different ways, talking about society and the cost, not just money costs? Think about cost of health services directed to a small number of people where they could actually cover a large number of people. Cost when you think about the possibility that someone may miss out on treatment because so much funds are being diverted to one person or blood or whatever. Think about cost to people as a whole when a few are affected and needing a large amount of money or services spent. Think about family, not just the individual, and not just cost in money, but also cost in time, in mental health is a big one. A lot of these people, if you're a full-time carer, and you guys may not have been with people who are full-time carers, but full-time carers often don't have a life of their own. And if you do have the money to try and bring in support services, it's very, very rare. So it's very difficult for the family. And finally, but definitely not the least, cost to the individual. What sort of lifestyle will they have? It is not always about having life. It's about actually having quality of life. And whether or not you can actually live a reasonable life as a human being where you feel like you can actually be a member of society. We are not meant to be locked away and unable to function. That is not how our bodies were made. Anyone who is locked away like that has a very limited life. What needs to be done to help that individual have quality of life so that they can actually be mentally happy within themselves as much as they possibly can, given the disease that they have. All of those things need to be considered. Now, evaluating is about looking at your research process, looking at the claim, looking at the conclusion, and really talking about whether or not you've got quality conclusion, quality evidence, and where you go from here. So for a passing level, you need to be able to comment in there, usually down either in your conclusion as part of an evaluation or with your reference material, the quality of the evidence you have, whether it's enough, whether it's from reliable sources, whether you have a broad enough range of evidence to make a reasonable conclusion, or whether it's limited. So it's building on that decision about whether or not you have enough evidence in order to make a justified conclusion. Have you actually applied those findings properly? I'll be actually looking at that because I can see what sources you've gone to, and I'll be asking you for your research notes, your dot points. I'll be looking to see whether you've used them properly when you're justifying your conclusion. And also, if you can, I'm not going to really mark it this time, but you will be doing this in future ones. This is where you actually have to say, okay, where do we go from here? What's the future of this situation from here? What sort of research needs to be done? Or how can you improve what you've done for next time you research? That's the only way I would be marking this right now. And if you wanted to gain bonus marks, you can talk about this. What can you actually do next time to improve the outcomes in your research investigations and to improve your ability to make justified conclusions? It's an evaluation. You need to put that in there, either in your conclusion or down in your reference section. Finally, communication. I need to actually look at this communication, see whether or not you've drawn your Punnett squares properly, you've drawn your pedigrees properly, using the genre conventions I taught you, and whether or not you've used scientific language appropriately as well. So I'm going to stop the video now and go on to the next page, which is actually looking at the exemplar.